Hope everyone had a great holiday weekend, a great Christmas. Andrew Zarian and I are here. We're going to do a little bit of like year end stuff. We're going to talk about stories of the year, matches of the year, shows of the year. But Andrew, how was the Christmas with the children? You're still
Oh, it
at
was a
such a fun
blast.
age for Christmas, man.
Oh, they love it, man. It's actually a lot of fun seeing how happy they are. It's like the greatest day in the world. You get up, you have all these gifts under a tree. You play with the gifts all week because you have no school. It's fantastic. They love it.
Is there any hangover? Like, because I remember, I mean, even when I was a kid, like you wake up super early, it's all exciting, and then it's all done by like 8 o'clock in the morning, and then you have some time to open your stuff and play with your stuff. But then, like by noon, you're just like, all right, what else is going on here? What else are we gonna do
So
today?
we the way that it works here, because that's what happened 2 years ago. We're like, okay, we can't let them open everything. So they are only allowed to open X amount of gifts per day. So Christmas continues throughout the week for them. So they could open like two gifts or one gift one day and then play with that gift, and then they can move on to another one. So we don't just blow through everything.
There you go. That's probably really smart.
We have a
Lisa
whole
okay?
system going.
Wait, but are you a New Year or Christmas Eve or Christmas Day family? Because I know there's
So
people who do it
yeah,
differently.
we do Christmas Eve for the party with the family, and then Christmas Day is just us, and the kids get the gifts, and we just hang out at home during Christmas.
Okay, there you go. All right, so what are we gonna do today? Well, first, I wanted to talk a little bit about this Ric Flair documentary that debuted yesterday, and if anyone in the chat was able to see it, would love to hear what you all thought. And then, like I said, we're just gonna kind of go through stories and matches and kind of year end stuff because this is going to be our last show until the new year. And then I think when we come back next week, that's like the same night as Wrestle Kingdom, so that's going to be a long night for me. Are you? Are you going to watch Wrestle Kingdom in any way, or are you going to kind of check in on it? What's your plan with that?
Yeah, I generally because I have New Japan World, I generally catch the end when I wake up, like around like 4:30. Like if I know I'm gonna wake up, I wake up like every hour and a half anyway. But when it's like closer to like 4:30, I'm like, okay, it's time to kind of get up. The kids are gonna get up in like in an hour, so I'll put it on and I'll have it on while I'm like, my gears are turning for the day. And
Sure.
then I'll just rewatch the whole thing and like when it's uploaded to like in its entirety on New Japan. But I'm excited for it. This is the first year they're kind of pseudo back. You have Kenny Omega there. You're gonna have
Yeah.
talent is traveling for the show, which I definitely a detriment to New Japan, the pandemic, more than any other territory, I think. But I think this is the beginning of the changeover, and you're gonna see guys like, listen, Kenny's back in New Japan. This should be a huge story.
Yes.
Huge. And
That's
and you know
that's my
what?
draw for this show is that Omega and
Nobody's really
Osprey
talking
match.
about it.
I know.
But
I
I,
don't
I
get
mean,
it.
and listen, when I say nobody, obviously someone's going to be like, no, people are talking. It's not the buzz that you would imagine. Kenny left Japan and never went back. And now he's back. It's been a couple of
Not on
years.
not on great terms either.
Yeah, not on great terms either. But this is a huge thing to see Kenny back there. And maybe, this is maybe going to do a crossover. Maybe Forbidden Door will be Okada and Omega again, Do
That'd
the
be
fourth
amazing.
match. You have opportunities here that you didn't 2 years ago. New Japan does, obviously. Why not take it, man? And you need a little shot in the arm here. They definitely need it. I'm excited for Wrestle Kingdom.
So, talked to Dave about this on the air a couple weeks back now. And I was like, so what are we doing for Wrestle Kingdom? Because back in the day, now, when I say back in the day, we're talking about 5-ish, 6, 7 years ago. We would all go to Dave's house and watch it because do you remember they were running it Jim Ross would come on. They were doing it as a pay-per-view, so we're able to see it. This is even before the New Japan service was out. And so we would just go to Dave's, and it's midnight, and you show up at midnight, and you watch until 5 o'clock in the morning, and we all then drive home because we're so tired. But this year, we hadn't done it probably since, gosh, I can't even remember the last time we did it. And so I talked to some friends, and they're like, oh, we need to do it again. This is a big show. So going to Dave's on Tuesday night at midnight
Love it.
and going to stay until 4 or whatever. And I guess there's an hour before that show. I don't know if I'm going to show up then, but the funniest thing is when we did it the first time, it was me and John LaRocca and a guy by the name of Dave Dutra, who's a wrestler out this way. And we were all there and we're like, okay, we need to get coffee. And, there's no Starbucks open at midnight. So we go to 7-Eleven, get our coffee, and we get Dave one. We're like, Dave, do you want a coffee? He's like, yeah, sure. And so we get it. We're all done with our coffee. Dave doesn't even touch his. And he's like, oh, yeah, I never really drink coffee. I'm like, dude, why did you want the coffee? He's like, oh, it was just in case I needed it. No, you're a machine. You didn't need the coffee because you are a machine. So
I think
so we're doing it again
for him to be up.
Exactly.
I think that'll keep him awake to begin with. No, I think, listen, that's a lot of fun, especially, I mean, what an experience for you and everybody else there, like watching Wrestle Kingdom with the Dave Meltzer, the king of Japan.
Yeah.
The king of the stars.
Well, so
I think that's really awesome.
The pandemic, right? He went to the Wrestle Kingdom right before the pandemic. And so we didn't see, so it may be like 17 or 18 the last time that we watched it at his place. So yeah,
wow.
we'll be back. We'll be back then. And I don't know about that driving home at 4:30 in the morning for me. That's a little rough. But okay, so here's what's actually kind of cool. So you have Wrestle Kingdom Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, and then you have Dynamite that night, right? Dynamite from Seattle. But also that night, I'm taking my my older boys to the Warriors game. So we'll be. I took the day off, so I was just like, nope. Usually I take the day off for Wrestle Kingdom just so I could sleep. But so I'm gonna be so tired, sleep a little bit, go to the Warriors game, come back, watch Dynamite.
Busy day.
I postponed the Fight Game podcast one evening for next week. So we'll do it Thursday night instead of Wednesday night. But yeah. There's a lot of stuff. And then, man, it's not too far from Royal Rumble season, and it's all just going to start all over again. That's wrestling for us, right?
Yeah, this is the beginning. Wrestle Kingdom starts the beginning of WrestleMania season, and all the wrestling starts heating up from January to April. You got a little bit of a slowdown, then the summer hits, and then it starts again. It's actually really cool how it happens. Like, this is my favorite time of the year for wrestling.
Yeah.
January. I mean, Royal Rumble starts it for me because that's my favorite show ever.
Yep.
But Wrestle Kingdom over the last couple of years, being able to see it live, on TV, has been a big thing. I had a question for you. What was the first Japanese match you remember seeing?
That's a good question. It's probably those WCW New Japan Super shows from the early 90s, because I wouldn't have had access to anything else before then. And so it was probably like, the Flair Fujinami and the that show from the Superdome from I guess from the Tokyo Dome, right? January of 91. Would that have been the date? That because they did. I remember WCW did a pay-per-view, but it was like it wasn't like exactly that night for what is now the Wrestle Kingdom time frame. I think it was like, it may have come out like a couple weeks later, but I remember watching that show, and then they run it back in May for Super Brawl, Flair and Fujinami thing. So Fujinami wins the belt from Flair, and then they run it back. But that would have been, I think it's like, I want to say it was shown in March maybe of 91, where they finally showed it on pay-per-view. But that would have been like, I had read about it here and there, but I'd never really seen it. Because I mean, in 1991, unless you're a heavy tape trader, and I was like, 15 years old, I wouldn't have seen any Japanese wrestling up until that point.
See, I discovered tape trading because of an older cousin.
Mm-hmm.
And the first, I mean, I'm sure I saw something on WCW, where they had Japanese talent on there. But I was trying to remember because there's a great Twitter account, Vintage Puru.
Yeah.
I don't know if you follow them. They have some great stuff. And it kind of like reignited what my first one was. And I believe it was a Kabashi and Masawa match. Mm-hmm. One of my first ever and I know we're going down the rabbit hole here, but I was so stunned by that, but their ability. I don't know if it was their 95 match or 97 match. I want to say it was probably 95, but it was so ahead of what WWF was doing at the time. Because,
Mm-hmm.
Northeastern kid. And I couldn't believe it. And I remember asking my cousin, like, is this real? How could it not be real?
Yeah,
And he
with
was
all
like, no, it's
the
just really,
chops and the heavy
yeah.
forearms and all that stuff. Yeah, man.
Yeah, man. Just really, and it kind of like reinvigorated me as like a kid for wrestling because like you kind of grow out of it at one point. Everyone's like,
Yeah,
wrestling's not real.
W
And then you
WWF at
see
that time was
this.
all cartoon characters and gimmicks and
Yeah.
Duke the Dumpster.
1995.
Yeah.
I probably didn't see it in 95. I probably saw it like in 96 or something. But like even
Mhm.
96, like, Sean and Brett were like the closest thing to seeing something like this. And this was
Yeah.
remarkable to see.
Okay, so
Unbelievable stuff.
I did some research here. WCW New Japan Super Show was known as Starrcade in the Tokyo Dome in Japan, and it was March 21st, 1991, but they did not air it on pay-per-view until April, so it was a couple weeks later. So then they would have run Super Brawl in May. So that makes sense to me as far as my memory of it. So I was off a couple months, but yeah. So on that show, you got to see Fujinami, obviously, the Great Muta. Ricky Choshu was on it. I'm trying to remember. I don't think that match was on. I don't know. Remember because they didn't show all the matches on the WCW pay per view because it was. I feel like it was like a 2-hour show. You got to see the Steiners against Hase and Sasaki, which I remember being a really really good match. And then Jushin, you got to see Jushin Thunder Liger as well. But I think they chopped that match up for some reason. It was like a long match. 15, 16 minutes. I feel like they chopped it up to like a 4-minute match or something. So that would have been my first foray. And then, when I'm growing up, you hear, and because I'm a Hogan guy, right? Oh, Hogan actually did wrestling when he was in Japan. It
Yeah,
wasn't
against
just
Muda.
it wasn't just the big boot and the leg drop like it is here. He would do, back in the 80s with the Inoki days and such. Oh, he actually did wrestling matches, and then he would do some stuff when he left WWF in '93. Then he went back and did some more matches. I think he wrestled. Who did he wrestle? Was it wasn't
He didn't
Stan
wrestle
Hansen?
Muda.
So
What year are you talking about?
So like 93,
93, he did
94,
Muda.
because he went back to New Japan for like some crazy amount of money.
Yeah, Hogan's doing a drop toe hold and an enziguri, and I'm like, well, how is this man moving like that? Like
Yeah.
no big boot in this crap. I mean, he actually
Exactly.
he used the lariat as his finish over there, right?
Yeah, what do they call it? It was the power bomb, or it was not the power bomb. It was the power. People in the chat
Something.
can help us out.
Someone in the chat will know. Yeah, wild stuff, amazing. I love that older stuff. I love as like a wrestling fan when I was like a teenager to find something like that was so cool. Like it was like
because it
you
wasn't
remember, this is
covered over
before.
here. Yeah.
Yeah, there was, and also the Axe Bomber. There you go.
There you go.
Sports time machine in the chat room. The Axe Bomber. But like
Good pull. Good pull.
I know this show's going all over the place, which I love it. But that, and you know what else stands out to me? Terry Funk and Sabu in that barbed wire match in ECW. The match wasn't this mind-blowingly great barbed wire match, but the commercial with the Phantom of the Opera and Paul Heyman is saying that this match is too extreme even for ECW. I remember when I got that tape, I was like, oh my gosh, I gotta see this. And it was like you saw something you weren't intended to see. Same thing for the Japanese content too. Like you don't get this content here. It's not WWF TV, it's not WCW, and you're watching it, you're like, oh, I shouldn't be seeing this.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so just real quick, only because I just got finished watching it. The Ric Flair documentary that came out on Peacock yesterday. I was joking with Dave on Friday when we did our show that why didn't they just run this in the Raw slot? Because Raw was a tape show, though Raw is always going to do a better rating than a documentary like that. I thought it was pretty decent. Now, documentary in the truest sense of the word is supposed to be like an unbiased look at things. And recently, we've seen these athlete documentaries. There was the Michael Jordan Last Dance, the 10 episode documentary, which none of that stuff would have happened if it didn't get Jordan's sign off. So just so people know that. And then there was a Lakers one just recently as well, where it's really, you could tell, Lakers brass had a lot to do with that. And so this is more in that vein where it is WWE produced, so they're not going to go into certain things, but they did go pretty deep into Ric's issue with alcohol, his son passing away, and that's always a sad story to go, and really the idea was, the filmmaker was trying to separate like Richard Fleer from Ric Flair, and like, how is that person different? And one thing that Rick was very interestingly adamant about was when Triple H sent him to rehab. And so he said that Triple H called him up and said, "You're going to rehab." And Rick said no. And he said that, well, if you don't go, then you're never going to work for us again. You're never going to be on WWE TV. And so Rick said he went for 35 days. And literally the day he came out of rehab, he went right across the street to the bar. Like,
What year would this have been?
This would have been, right after it would have been right. God, it must have been like 13 or 14, sometime in there. Because I think it's still before. So Rick's son passes away in 2013. So maybe it's after that. It's got to be right after that, because he was saying that this is how he dealt with the son's passing, was just by drinking. And I think it was Megan who said he wasn't even showering at this point. So he was clearly very depressed, obviously, and using alcohol to drown. And so at the end of this thing, you're thinking like, oh, Rick gets cleaned up and this is going to be this happy story. And he's like, nope. I drink because I love it. And it's just like, why does someone golf? That's why I drink. And he goes through this routine that he does in the evening of how many drinks he has before he goes to bed. And it's ridiculous. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, how is this guy still doing as well as he did? And, he had that health scare, right? And he had the health scare. And then he comes out of that health scare. We all thought he was going to pass. I remember being at Dave's house and just being like, okay, like, what, how are things? And he's just like, not great at all. Like, they're telling the family to prepare, right? And so then he comes out of that and he goes right back to being the Nature Boy. And it's just crazy. Like, this dude with the health issues and everything is still running hard and in his early 70s now. So I think it's worth watching. If you're a Ric Flair fan, I think you'll enjoy it. If you are just a wrestling fan, I think you'll get a kick out of a lot of it. But yeah, Rick, man, he's a maniac, and I don't even say that in a negative way. That's just who he is, and how he keeps going. It's incredible, incredible, both bad and good. And he even says that he's like, I'm the luckiest guy in the world for both good and bad reasons. So
yeah,
good stuff. Though,
I mean,
if you like them,
generational talent for sure.
Yeah.
But you look at the guys from his generation. It was a common thing to live like that. It's. I don't know if sports has. I mean, all of sports was like that too. Like you hear the stories. Michael Jordan. I mean, Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player of all time. I don't care what anybody says. LeBron isn't. It's Michael Jordan. I'll fight you on this. I don't care. I'll fist fight you. Michael Jordan, one of the greatest talents. You hear the stories. He was out drinking of a night of an NBA final.
Gambling.
Like the whole story that he had the flu. He didn't have the flu. He had a hangover.
There's a couple of different versions of that story for sure, but the hangover one has come out recently. The funny story that they always tried to say was that the local pizza place put something in the food to give them food poisoning because they were they're in Utah, so don't order food on the road in the NBA finals. But yeah, the hangover one, it does make a lot of sense. It kind of made me think though, wrestling's history in the way that it's been chronicled. So we just saw the Vince McMahon documentary, and that was pretty poor effort. I felt.
Yeah.
You have all those people, you have all those really good journalists doing the interviews, and then the Dark Side team or whoever's producing it just goes, you know what would be good if we just piece together all the old footage from the Dark Sides so that we could shoehorn all that stuff in. and not have to do a ton of work in this thing, which is what
Do you
what it should have been.
do you have a favorite? What's your favorite wrestling documentary? Not on like not affiliated with WWE. You know, the WWE put out a bunch of like, they had a series, a pretty decent one for the time that they put them out. When they were doing the DVDs. But what's your favorite?
Well, the Bret Hart one, obviously, right? Like that's the one where it just felt like, wow, we're watching something we're not supposed to be watching. But one of my favorites that I don't hear a lot of people talk about is WWE produced on Superstar Billy Graham, 20 Years Too Soon. Have you ever seen that one?
I want to say I have, but it has to be a while that I've seen it.
So it's like so there's a book on Billy that comes out, and then I think that there's like a corresponding DVD. And the reason why I like that one so much is because I have a big time blind spot for sort of the mid 70s to early 80s WWE, because I've never watched any of that stuff. So seeing Billy, and just the idea that they was trying to say like, oh, Billy, if they just let him keep going instead of having him lose to Backlund, like he could have been Hogan before Hogan, and just like how
Hogan
they booked, right?
Hogan, though.
Well, I mean, he was who Hogan copied for sure, but
Yeah.
just they're just saying, what Billy could have been, maybe the top star ever in WWF, but he beats Bruno, and he's a heel, and he has this year-long run, and they're doing great business. But the way that Vince McMahon Sr. booked was, it was a babyface who was going to carry the territory. So the second Billy wins that title, he knows when he's going to lose it, and he's going to lose it to Backlund on this day. And no matter what he did to fight it, it was just going to happen. So just the way that you book, that way in the 70s, and today, Vince McMahon was rewriting Raw 30 minutes before the show's going on there, like just the difference in how things were going. But yeah, that Superstar one is really good. I hate to keep bringing this one up, but when that Benoit one came out, that was amazing. Eddie Guerrero had a really good one as well. But those, those are a little bit like, I feel like people don't like to mention those as much because of sort of the sad endings of those guys, and I guess the angry ending for Benoit.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were in a real sweet spot around that time frame. But
they also put out the ECW one that did so well that they brought the brand back. I mean, that was a tremendous one that they did in WWE. This is probably one of my favorite ones. I had it.
Yes, that's another good one.
Beyond the Mat.
Yes.
Love Beyond the Mat because they pulled the curtain back so much. Where like Mick Foley, he was such a lovable guy in that show, and the whole story is based, just the storytelling, and you see the behind the scenes stuff, and those guys were training. What's his name? Brought his talent. You would know
Roland
this.
Alexander.
You probably know him. Roland brought a talent, and they're sitting there watching him. Just very well put together. Another one, Memphis Heat. A lot of people don't talk about Memphis Heat. Very good documentary on Memphis wrestling.
That. I need to rewatch that. I feel like when I watched it the first time, like I wasn't super paying attention, but that's one that everyone brings up as the best one. Roland Alexander, my co-host on the Fight Game podcast, John LaRocca, he studied under Roland Alexander, and he booked Roland's APW. For him. Yeah. So he had a really close relationship with Roland. And then the guy who currently runs APW right now, his name is Marcus Mack. He had a close relationship. And then there's another guy, I think his name is.
And Roland passed away a couple years ago, right?
He passed gosh, it was like
before the pandemic,
6-7 years ago now, because I was at John, after he left APW to kind of start his own thing, he called it Premiere, and it was a little bit more grappling based. It was more like less gimmicks and outside stuff and hardcore stuff, and more like in ring stuff. And it's really where Jeff Cobb kind of he got all the reps as champion for John, and so that's kind of where John where Jeff honed his craft to become who he is today, was in these matches that I'm watching. I'm sitting right in the front row, but we were at a show, and they did the 10 bell salute because it wasn't too far after Roland had passed. So that's why I remember. I think it was like in maybe 15 or something, or right around that time period. But Beyond the Mat is really good. And what's funny is Beyond the Mat and the Bret Hart one, they come out like right around the
Same
same time,
time.
like maybe a
Yeah.
little bit. Beyond the Mat comes out a little bit after that, but so you see the pre-Attitude Era Vince, right? Like Vince is trying all these things, and you see him being more open and being a little bit more graceful, even though he's probably lying to all these guys. But you remember the Beyond the Mat scene where he's trying to get Draws to
Draws to
puke.
puke. Yeah.
And he
I
starts
you know,
doing the
my
Vince
wife
voice.
hates that. My
Yeah.
wife hates it. So I do the Vince voice constantly. When I was a kid, I would have my figures. You know, I'm an '80s kid, right? So I would have
Yeah.
like the toys, and I would always do Vince McMahon on commentary. My mother would lose her crap. Take the slipper, throw the slipper. You know, like Andrew, just stop. I can't listen to that voice. I play that clip for my wife all the time, and she gags. She leaves. She has to run out the freaking door. She can't hear Vince scream, "He's got to puke," you know? The whole thing just makes her so uncomfortable, runs out the door. The other night, I put it on. She had just come in. She was out with her friends. I'm like, oh, Jess had a couple to drink. I'm going to put this on and just mess with her. I put it on. She goes, nope, and runs out of the room. Just
That's
crazy.
hilarious.
I love that stuff, though. I mean, just pulling the curtain back, I absolutely love it just to,
and
get a
especially
little
because we didn't get that, right? Like we didn't get that back then. Now you get it all the time, but yeah, back then it was like, oh, any little nugget of information that we, if you're reading the Observer, you got it from the writing perspective, but you never really saw it.
I got to tell Lance a story. I was at the Elks Lodge one time, and this has to be like 97 or 98, like peak ECW. And, like we're leaving, and I saw Lance with like his luggage just like leaving the building. And I'm like, as a kid, you're seeing this. You go, oh my gosh, like he's not in the ring. He's like a normal guy just carrying his luggage to wherever he was going. He was going to his car or whatever. Just like stuff like that. I get such it tickles me a little bit. You kind of pull the curtain back and you see a little bit of like, Franchise was walking with Francine. I'm like, oh my God, they're traveling together. It is real. They are a team, stuff like that. Very cool stuff, especially in those days, because you never got to see that stuff. Even though the forums existed, people were on message board. Tony Khan was trolling everybody on a message board somewhere.
What was his
curious.
username? Did he have like a funny username back then?
I don't know. See, I was a WrestleZone guy. I was on the WrestleZone forums, and I remember and I was always polite, because I always saw everybody attacking everybody. I'm like, hey guys, just have a question. And I would ask a dumb question, like who knows what dopey question I had, but I'm sure Tony was in there, fantasy booking Hogan and Backlund for the title somewhere. I would love to see those posts. Actually, I'm sure nobody dive into those posts. I don't know what Tony said. I'm sure he was a good boy. I'm sure they exist somewhere.
So my friend had an opposite reaction to what you just said. So it was after a WWF event, probably I'm going to guess back in the late 80s, and he said him and his dad went to go eat somewhere after. It was like at a Denny's or whatever, and he sees Greg the Hammer Valentine sitting at the same table and eating dinner with like Hacksaw Jim Duggan, and he was heartbroken. He's like, these guys just had a match against each other, and now they're friends. What's going on? And he that was it for him. That was it for him. Come on, Hammer. You can't be eating dinner with Hacksaw Jim Duggan if you just fought him. You guys traded hands, and now you're eating. Yeah. Okay, so throwing this out to the chat room as well. Just interested in AEW and WWE favorite matches of the year, and throw in your ROH and throw in your New Japan as well if you want. But I was like trying to figure out, because we are in an era where wrestling matches there's so many of them, and back
so many good ones
years ago. Well, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if you had to think, okay, what was my favorite wrestling match of the year? You could probably immediately think of it, because there wasn't as many. Like, go back to 1997. It's like, oh yeah, Bret Hart, Stone Cold Steve Austin. Like, that was the greatest match of that year at WrestleMania 13. But I was like looking through lists, because I was like, do I really know what my favorite AEW match of the year was? And I couldn't really think of which one that it was. That I was like, is it that tag team match? Where I think you had to leave because it was in Chicago, and you didn't get to stay for that show, right? Because you leave? You had to leave early that show. When
No,
and
Vegas. I
all
had to
out.
leave early.
Oh,
No,
Vegas.
Vegas.
You
I left early.
all
I
out.
wasn't
You
at
didn't
All Out
go.
this year. I was
Yeah,
at the.
because
I was
your
at the
hip
previous
was
All
hurt.
Out, which
Right.
my yeah. So people ask me why I didn't go to All Out. I fractured my hip last summer.
Yeah.
I fell on my ass and I slipped on water and I really messed up my hip. So I was not there, but I had to leave. My father wasn't feeling well, so I had to leave Vegas and come back
That's
to
what
New
it was.
York. So I missed that pay-per-view, but I was there for the entirety of the debacle leading into Double or
Yes.
Nothing.
Yes. That we'll talk about that in a second. But I was trying to think, what's my favorite AEW match of the year? I think it was the Swerve and Keith Lee versus the Acclaimed match. I just remember the crowd taking over that match and just it was awesome. But the actual wrestling match, when I looked back, because I went through some lists and I was like, okay, what match did I like the best? I think it was Bryan Danielson, Hangman Page on Dynamite. I think it was on Dynamite in January or something. I remember that match being like, okay, this is like the style of professional wrestling that I really, really enjoy. But then from the emotional, memorable side, then it was probably that all out tag team match. Do you remember what your Dynamite or AEW match of the year would be?
You know, it's weird because it's such a blur. They had so many good matches. There were so many fun matches that I enjoyed. I would say the dog collar match between Punk and MJF that stood out for me.
One. That's another one.
Because it was a really, and I'm not a fan of a dog collar match, or I thought I wasn't until I saw that, and then I saw the FTR match with the Briscoes, and to be honest, you know, it's fresh on my mind, and I have to do the same. I have to do this homework because we're doing the same conversation on Mat Men this week.
Mm-hmm.
That really, I went into that match not wanting to see it because I'm not a fan of the dog collar matches. I think it kind of hampers what you can do in the ring. But holy moly, that match was unbelievable, ridiculously good, and that's really stood out to me as far as the Ring of Honor stuff. But for AEW, I mean, there was so many positives as far as in-ring goes, outside of all the backstage stuff. But I think it was definitely the Punk MJF one because it was a really good build to that feud. They did a fantastic job with it. And he came out to his old Ring of Honor theme. You know, it was done really well, really well.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I guess, I saw the first FTR Briscoes match, but I didn't watch the other two because I didn't buy those pay-per-views. So I cannot even really say, I can't really talk about that match. But from the New Japan side, it's probably one of the Okada Ospreay matches, which again, also in January. So trying to remember a match from January after we've seen so much wrestling throughout the year is kind of tough. I know a lot of people liked that. What is it? Anarchy in the Arena, or what was that match where they went all over the building? But I was there live, so I couldn't see everything. And I know on TV it was probably a lot better. But yeah, those are some good matches. Now, what would I ask you? Somebody mentioned in the chat. Somebody mentioned the Shida and Jamie Hayter match from last week's Dynamite, which was awesome. I really liked that match.
Fantastic.
Too.
Yeah.
What about from the WWE side? Do you have a specific WWE match that you're gonna remember?
The Cody stuff was pretty cool with Seth. I very much like that. A big surprise to me was Gunther and Sheamus for the IC title. That was a great match. WWE, it's more, as in a Vince Russo term, pyro and ballyhoo, right? It's a lot of that. So you kind of, it doesn't have to be a great match for you to like the match, but I think Roman and Seth had a great match at Rumble. That stood out to me, which nobody really talks
like that
about.
one was like a lot shorter than I thought it was going to be, though.
It was, but I liked it. I was into it. Drew and Roman at Clash at the Castle was a good match.
Yeah, that was really good.
I don't think they had a breakout year for in-ring performance. But listen, man, you got Steve Austin and Kevin Owens at WrestleMania. That's a memorable match.
Yep.
Definitely a memorable. They had more memorable matches than really good matches.
So, along that vein, I think it's Cody and Seth in the Cell for me. because it wasn't the best in-ring match of all time, but Cody's chest is all
What a
purple
story.
and the dude is clearly in pain. And to do all of that was probably the one that I remember most from 2022. Is just, and that's you're bringing in some realism, which helps. And Seth is such a great prick that Cody as the baby face and is already handicapped with the torn pec and he's in peril. And so they told an excellent story. And yeah, I think that would be mine. But the Gunther and Sheamus, like, that was amazing in ring. It was
Really good
a
match, yeah.
match that WWE doesn't really do, right? Like, they don't really do that sort of style of match. It was not a WWE style match. It was way more of like the kind of match that you would see maybe in New Japan or something.
Yeah, and I'm curious if we're going to get more in-ring style matches like that this coming year. We're still dealing with with some of Vince's plan and a lot of the stuff that he had put in place. Listen, great example of the changeover from Vince. Do you think if Vince was still running the ship or steering the ship, I should say, we would get a best of show on Monday like we did? I don't think so.
I don't think
I
so
don't think
either.
that would have happened. I think we would have gotten a regular Raw and they would have run the Garden and done like a half-assed house show at the Garden because they know it's going to sell. They could put in 9,000 people in that building because it's the Garden, and that would have been it. But, we're seeing these changes happen. We're seeing different matches. We're seeing different combinations of matches. I'm curious. I'm really curious to see the direction that they go as far as in-ring goes because I don't think they had a breakout in-ring year, but they had a lot of memorable matches. Something that is with the casual fan, okay? Not us. Not anybody watching, or maybe some people watching this. You know what I hear about constantly that drives me nuts is that Jackass match from Mania.
Oh, wow. With Sammy?
Yeah. And I'm talking like casual fans, like my friends that their kids watch and they watch too. People love that crap. And I'm like, you know what?
That's funny.
That's the direction they're going, or they were going, memorable matches that really in ring doesn't really matter. And people talk about it. And it stands out. To me, that's not what I'm into. I'm not into that stuff. I was not into that Jackass match at all, but I watched it and I understood why it was so entertaining to people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now,
So
am I going to give it a am I going to give it a star rating? Absolutely not. But
yeah. No, I mean it fits, right? You can't have more than one of those matches on a card, but on a show like WrestleMania, it fits because you get Johnny Knoxville and Sami Zayn and it doesn't stand out in a bad way. Now, if you did more than one of those matches on the same show, then you'd be like, okay, there's enough of this. Okay, so I was looking at the chat, and so just going to throw out some matches from folks who are here in the chat. So Finn Balor versus Edge. I guess I think it's the I Quit match that came up in the chat. The Cody versus Sammy Guevara ladder match on the AEW
very good
side
match. Yeah.
came up on the chat. Let me go back here a little bit. Let's see. Lots of Okada Ospreay, FTR versus Aussie Open, Royal Quest 2. Let me see. Nathan Frazier versus Axiom. So yeah, if you're watching, NXT or NXT UK, Nathan Frazier against Carmelo Hayes. I've seen Ricochet versus Carmelo Hayes, Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns, last man standing. I've seen some men's war games. Now, the men's war games match was a great story. I didn't like the match that much because I thought the way that war games usually works, they didn't work it in the way that where you get the psychology and the fans to kind of get into it. But the story with Sammy having to having to get Kevin Owens out of there and becoming going on the good side of the Usos, I thought that worked. Some blood and guts. Someone said blood and guts. Thunder Rosa and Britt Baker, the bloodbath match. Let me see. I'll just go through a couple more here. And let's see. Yeah, I guess that's about it. That's about what people were talking about. Okay, so now when we look back at Wrestler of the Year, Wrestler of the Year is hard because I think you sort of have to define what Wrestler of the Year means. Does it mean high work rate? Does it mean lots of matches? Does it mean biggest box office draw? How do you define Wrestler of the Year when you vote in stuff like this?
It's so difficult, man, because for me, I'm big on work rate, right? And entertainment in the match. I would like, it's hard. Like, I know the easy answer here is Roman,
Yeah.
right? It has to be. The easy answer is Roman because
Except he only wrestled 10 matches or something.
Exactly. He only wrestled like a handful of matches. So I can't go with him, but I would have to say, I mean, if you're going based on just being the backbone of the company, it would have to be Jon Moxley. Easy.
So
Easy.
I think how, and this we'll see what happens in the Wrestling Observer Reader Awards. I think I think both of those two and Will Ospreay are going to rank very highly in that Lou Thesz Ric Flair award. But like this goes back to the mid 80s, right? Where it was like Hogan or Flair, who's the wrestler of the year, Hogan or Flair. And from a pro wrestling matches standpoint, the guy who wrestled so many X number of times a year, that's Flair.
Sure.
Is it the guy who drew the most money on pay-per-view?
But
Well, that's Hogan. And so that I feel like we're going to always have this dichotomy about what this award really means.
yeah, I don't think, listen, I think to me, it could be a different answer. I would say tag team of the year, I would go with FTR. I know there's an argument for the Usos, but I would say FTR.
The Acclaimed as well should be up there.
The Acclaimed as well. I think the rise of the Acclaimed is a great story, but
yeah, absolutely.
But if you're going, who was the biggest draw in the business? It's Roman. Right? To some people, you're going to say, well,
I think it's Roman. I would say it's Roman because he is the one that carries those pay-per-views that he's on. But what was a bigger match for WrestleMania? Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns or Stone Cold Steve Austin and Kevin Owens?
I would say Stone Cold Steve Austin and Kevin Owens.
You know what I would also say is Cody and Seth may have been equal to it. Now, you didn't know. You kind of knew, but you didn't know. But that program, I think they did 3 pay-per-views in a row with that program. And that may have been more meaningful.
And they're going to do it again.
Than Roman and Brock. But and then this is not to discredit Roman because I love Roman. I've been such a big Roman guy, and finally getting to see him. Now, he's never going to win over all the naysayers, right? Because there's so many people who are like, I've seen this guy on top since 2013, enough. And there will be those 2013, 14, 15, whenever you pick the start date for when they started pushing the crap out of Roman. But there will always be people who are just not going to be into him. But I do like it that some people have crossed over and they're starting to give him his flowers, because I just think he's a great talent who was saddled with, WWE pushing him when the fan base wasn't really ready for him to be pushed in the way that he does.
Well, it was this John Cena. It was a John Cena project, right? It was the same thing. You keep him as a babyface, you push, and then the fans don't want it.
Yeah.
And they were able to kind of rehab that and make him into a very dominant heel that everybody loves. I don't, to me, in talking this out, I would say it's Jon Moxley hands down because of all the work he did in the wrestling business, not just for AEW, what he did for New Japan, what he did for the Indies. He very much was all over the place. He was GCW champion.
Yeah.
While he's on AEW, just a wacky year for pro wrestling. But I think that kind of makes him the guy, the man. Nobody worked, and you got to give it to Jericho also.
Yeah,
Jericho, he doesn't have to do this anymore. He doesn't. And he could be a guy that says, "I'm putting myself over. I'm an established star. I've done it all." F you, pay me. And he's not doing that. He's working with younger talent. I think for a lot of people come into have their own bias when it comes to talent, what they like, what they don't like. But you got to acknowledge a lot of this stuff. You got to see what it's done for wrestling. I think Jon Moxley, for sure, most valuable player. I think
Jon
maybe CM Punk would have been
Moxley.
that guy if this didn't happen. If the CM Punk injuries didn't happen and he didn't lose his mind in that scrum, maybe CM Punk would have been the guy.
Yeah, so as we know, Moxley was had to put over Punk, and Punk was going to be the guy, and he did. And then when it didn't happen and all hell broke loose at All Out, then they had to go back to Moxley. And so he was very valuable to them. You can't just make anybody champ. Like, you could have probably done it with Jericho. You could have done it with Moxley. Probably not with Hangman, because I felt, after he lost the championship, there was a little bit of all the good things that he gained. They did not follow after he lost his championship. So it's probably Jericho and Moxley are the only two guys, and you don't want to put Daniel Bryan or Bryan Danielson, I'm sorry, in that situation, because you want if he does get a championship win, you want it to be the first one, and you want to celebrate that. So you wouldn't shoehorn him in there. But yeah, like, Moxley was very valuable to just making sure that the company was in a bad situation, that they still have not. I don't think they've come back from it yet with that CM Punk scenario there. So he had to kind of make sure that they didn't miss even more steps than they did. And that's why, that's when he showed his value big time. I would probably pick Moxley, but then again, there's all these Will Ospreay matches that I didn't see that are really great, supposedly, from what everyone says. And so you can't really disconnect him from that scenario. It's just that he works for New Japan, and he's not working in the United States that long. He did work at Forbidden Door. Okay, so now that I just mentioned Forbidden Door, what about show of the year? What was your favorite show that you saw in 2022?
Oh, man. That's a great question. WrestleMania was a lot of fun. I very much liked WrestleMania. Double or Nothing was a really good show. All Out was a really good show. Revolution was a really good show. I thought that Saudi show they did a very good job with, shockingly. Not my favorite show of the year, but very good show. I don't know. I'm going to go with maybe, I don't know what. It's hard. Maybe Double or Nothing or All Out? What do you think was a better show? Double or Nothing?
Yeah, being at both of them, that's an interesting question, because I would have to think back. I felt slightly disappointed coming out of Double or Nothing, but that might have been just because I was so frustrated with all the BS that was happening that weekend, with stuff that, if people are close to me, they know what I'm talking about. But I don't know, WrestleMania Night 1, man, that's still the thinking back to that, and thinking back to Austin coming out and wrestling that match. Like, I had so much pride as an Austin guy watching him. And it's kind of silly to say, right? Because, it's not like it was Austin in 1997 or 1998. This is 2022. This dude is in his 60s, and I'm just rooting for him. I'm rooting for him to
50s.
He's not 60 yet?
No.
So I'm rooting for him to do well, obviously, because he does not want to embarrass himself. But there's also a little bit of, like, fear for me, because I don't want him to get hurt at the same time. So I'm, like, super invested in how he does. And you don't really get tied up in wrestling like that, or at least I don't that much anymore, where you care that much. So yeah, that is probably the most memorable. But yeah, I'm sure Forbidden Door, just the uniqueness of that show was super memorable to me as well. And you already mentioned it, that Clash at the Castle. Gosh, how many WWE shows have we seen where the wrestling was that good on several of those matches? So that's a memorable one too. And then you mentioned the Saudi show. Now, I think on the whole show of itself, you're like, take it or leave it. But Logan Paul and Roman Reigns, holy cow.
Let me tell you, though. I'll tell you why. It was on at 12 in the afternoon.
Yeah. No, that's
I
that. Yeah,
freaking
and that's a
loved-
positive.
and that's a positive. That gave it a couple points for me. I it was a weird year for wrestling. I think the big story for wrestling this year will be the things that happened outside of the ring in every possible way for both companies. And even Japan, right? All the stuff that happened outside of the ring with the clapping and the no cheering, and that was a big story. The lockdown was a big story. Vince McMahon leaving, Cody leaving AEW, CM Punk leaving, or we don't know yet, right? With the CM Punk issue, there was a lot of what ifs and backstage stories, and also something that we really are not putting in here is the Warner Media Discovery merger. That will play a huge part in the future of AEW and future of pro wrestling going forward. So I don't know if the match, like as far as a pay-per-view goes, there were so many good ones. All the AEW ones were fantastic. They knock it out of the park every single time. I don't think I've ever watched an AEW pay-per-view and said, it was meh. I've never felt that way. And I feel like that about WWE often, but
yes.
I don't know which AEW I would say was the best one. Forbidden Door was great. Revolution was great. Double or Nothing. Full Gear was really good too. I don't know what I would pick.
Somebody said you're forgetting the mehness of All Out 2020.
What was the card on that one?
I don't remember it either. There was a couple pandemic AEW pay-per-views where I was
Yeah, I mean, listen, you got to look at it for what it is, right? Yeah. The main event, I believe, what was the main event here? Was Jon Moxley MJF, right? That was the main event. Orange Cassidy defeated Chris Jericho. Oh yeah, this was not great.
Was that the Mimosa match?
The Mimosa Mayhem match. You know what? Match of the year, Mimosa Mayhem match. FTR versus Kenny and Adam Page. You had that. I mean, yeah, this was not a great card.
Okay, so somebody asked in the chat, Austin and Jericho are not that many years apart in age. So why am I freaked out when I watch Austin? And well, it's because Austin had to retire from wrestling at
because he broke his neck.
In 2003 because of his neck being messed up. That is why. And also when he's tried to come back and he hits Miz with a stunner, and then he's just in so much pain from doing the stunner that we just never thought he was coming back. So to actually see him come back and to be like, oh my gosh, I know he's been wanting to come back. I know that he's worried about being embarrassed and not being good. It stopped him. And then for him to do it and be really good and have such a great partner there in Kevin Owens, it was like the perfect scenario. All of my...
Listen, 6 years. There's a 6-year age gap there, right? Yeah. And Jericho stayed active throughout his entirety. Jericho's never really had a long...
He's never retired. He's kind of been in and out, but he would always come back. So, yeah, totally. Okay, so last thing before we get out of here. Story of the year. And I think there are two big ones, and it's sort of depending on how you see the year. The first one is absolutely Vince McMahon, right? Vince McMahon being removed from power in WWE because of all the Wall Street Journal stuff that had come out. And then it's Muffin Gate with CM Punk. Both of those stories are giant. Vince McMahon one obviously got a little bit more publicity because it was a Wall Street Journal piece. But when it comes to the wrestling side of things, Muffin Gate may have actually impacted wrestling more than even the Vince thing did.
Yeah, I think Muffin Gate is hysterical, by the way. I think Muffin Gate for the short term, for sure. I think Cody leaving AEW is more of a long-term story that kind of started this ball rolling. But Vince leaving changes everything. And the impact on AEW that Vince leaving, that was the beginning of the turn, right? Like, that's when people, the honeymoon phase for AEW started falling apart this year, which a lot of it had nothing to do with them, but a lot of it did. But Vince leaving, Hunter coming in, and people saying like, wow, now we're going to get the WWE that we want, kind of changed the perspective here. The tide shifted a little bit in WWE side. But I mean, listen, it's all about the long game. You know, you'll
Mm-hmm.
have stuff like this happen all the time. It's about how you pivot and how you shift and change your plans to kind of adapt to this. You know, we're going to see what Tony does in 2023 because he has a big year ahead of him. This is it's a contract year. You don't have your big star in CM Punk, or maybe you will. I don't, I if we're going to do a prediction, my bold prediction will be CM Punk shows up on AEW TV.
Yes.
That's my bold prediction. Not that I
Wait.
know anything about it.
Wait.
Yeah.
Wait. Say that again so we can get the proper clip so that we can put it on YouTube. I want you to say it in clear. This is your best take right here. Speak it into existence.
This is my best. You know, I would have said my take would have been CM Punk goes back to WWE. That would have been my big take. However, after a conversation I had last week, which I had a conversation with somebody, I would say that is not going to happen with CM Punk returning back to WWE. But I do think if there was a possibility for him to wrestle again, it would be for AEW this year.
Interesting.
If I'm being, unless I'm being totally kayfabe by everybody that I speak to at WWE, and they're like, don't tell Zarian shit and tell him we don't want him and he's toxic and nobody wants him in this company. You can keep telling him that, but Tony is a business guy. He knows the importance of optics. Again, with that word, that's the word of the year, guys, ladies and gentlemen. If there was one word that I overused on the show, it's optics. But man, think of that freaking business. CM Punk shows up, and now you got a program with him and Omega.
Be great. It would really be great.
If you could make it work, you want to make it work. And the injury, maybe, CM Punk's injury, maybe kind of calm things down a little bit because you can't fire him if he's hurt, or you don't want to fire him if he's hurt. He could come back and, cooler heads prevail. It's wrestling, but at the end of the day, these are very rich people that are in the business of making money. And what a great story that would be for professional wrestling, that CM, after all of this, he came by and they were able to make business and make money and make it work. People didn't think Bret Hart would return back to WWE, and he did.
True.
Bill Goldberg, he did. Hulk Hogan, he did. Ultimate Warrior. The list goes on to Bruno. At the end of the day, time heals all wounds, especially if you tear your pec. And that may be a blessing in disguise.
Tricep.
Randy did it, but Randy did. So Brian in the chat, Randy didn't. Randy did. In 2013, right? Right before he passed away, whatever that year was. Maybe I'm wrong on the year. Whatever that year was, he was in that WWE All-Stars game, and he made a video for it.
Yes,
that was the beginning of the bridge.
And then when he passed away, were there any things in motion to get him into the Hall of Fame? I don't remember.
I don't remember. I really don't remember. But I do know that they wanted to do something with him.
Yeah.
He didn't want to be on TV because he didn't like how he looked. That was the big thing there, right? He chose not to, but he did that commercial. It's the beginning.
Yeah. Well, let's end it there. I like it. I like ending with that. That's a great 2023 prediction. Somebody's going to use that for the Brian Alvarez prediction show on Wrestling Observer Live.
Bill Goldberg, Steve Austin at WrestleMania. It's happening. That's it.
There you go. Aggregated again. There you go.
A three-way. It's a three-way match. Bill Goldberg, Steve Austin, and Brock Lesnar. Get it all done. Get those what ifs all out of the way.
WrestleMania 20 reunion match from when Austin was the referee in that terrible
I was
match
in that building.
I
was in that building, and I've never heard such hatred for two people like I did that night.
All right, before Lance gets mad at us, we will be at it. We're going to get out of here. We'll be back next week. It's going to be a long day for next Tuesday. But for Andrew, I'm Double G. We'll see you when we see you. Peace out.